to everyone. Welcome to the panel today on privacy, security standards in the age of big data analytics. My name is Annabelle. I'm from BSA, the Software Alliance, and just a quick amount of background, and I'm going to summarize some issues and let my panelists introduce themselves. So, BSA is an alliance that represents some of the world's biggest software companies, so the likes of Microsoft, AWS, but we also represent some very innovative one-in-the-cloud companies, and this includes people like Slack. I don't know how many of you in the room use their app, but I understand it's very, very cool, and a lot of people love it, and Okta. So we've got a huge range of companies that we represent on policy issues to governments all over the world. Most of our companies predominantly service enterprise customers, but of course these enterprise customers have to service clients or individual end users, and so that's where privacy is a big issue, and they're constantly thinking about best practices for how to ensure that their clients' privacy is maintained. So I'm very, very grateful to NITI-Aayog and ORF for organizing this wonderful conference. I have the benefit of talking about privacy, which is a really, really hot issue in India right now because you're in the process of going through the data protection bill. This is also the only panel where the word AI is not in the title, and we're talking about big data. So just from the outset, I'm just going to scope the discussion a little bit because I do know that there are modes of AI where they're not using real data. Right now in this panel, we are going to talk about personal data, and that's going to be very interesting and exciting panel. And I've got a great panel with me today. So without jumping into too much, I just wanted to say a couple of very, very quick things to try and draw the links between privacy, security, and AI. I say this because I think often when we think of AI, we think of a vast range of technologies, things like robots, full automation. What we don't think so much is about embedded AI, and I think most of the users of AI today are embedded into processes that already exist. This could be on your phones, this could be in software that you're using, and it could be used in, say, many different use cases and scenarios like medical situations, so on and so forth. The thing about privacy is that it's suddenly a very, very hot issue globally, and in a large part it has to do with the way big data has been used. Not so much AI, but big data has been used in like the last 5 years. Two big developments I want to just highlight that are off note, just for people in the room who are not as familiar with privacy. The first thing is that globally, the number of privacy legislations that are being passed in the last 5 years, it's an insane amount. So like organizations, countries everywhere are thinking about, if they don't already have a law, what kind of law that should look like. If they already have a law, how to update this law. And why is that the case? Because most privacy laws were actually written or conceptualized based off the OECD standards. Now, this was standards in the 1970s. It's not that computers went around then, but the internet wasn't as widely used, and certainly data wasn't collected the way it is today. And in the analog situation, it was a lot easier to rely on what I like to call the consent model. You enter a room, someone takes your information, it's usually very obvious why they're collecting it. They can ask you, are you okay with this? People say yes, that's it, consent is done. It makes a lot of sense in that context. Now, some transactions still occur like that today, but in today's world, when you're looking at big data, the transaction doesn't occur that way anymore. Sensors pick up data all the time. Companies have ridiculously broad consent clauses, and usually they are complying with the law even when they do that. So consent as a model doesn't make a lot of sense. At the same time, you have emerging technology, wonderful use cases. AI is a good example. Security is a big example as well. And I think so many of the ways that, say, companies that deal with fraud detection today, ensure that their networks work well, ensure they're secure, relies on that data, that constant flow of data. And so, as countries kind of contemplate how best to regulate and how best to think about protecting an individual's privacy, they are updating their laws. Most recently, not going to go into any detail about this, the EU's GDPR came into effect, and that's probably one of the biggest, the biggest waves globally. And the reason for that is because of cross-border data flows. And this is something that my member companies, but governments everywhere in the world are also thinking about constantly. In order to achieve the kinds of wonderful things that we've been talking about in emerging tech, data needs to flow. And it makes perfect sense in the world of the internet that data is borderless, but it doesn't make sense in in countries, in jurisdictions, in legal systems, that data should be allowed to cross borders this freely. And so one of the things that we've seen is a fragmentation, a potential fragmentation, and this is a cause of concern for a lot of companies and a lot of governments worldwide as well. We see a fragmentation of not only privacy laws, but also cybersecurity laws, as countries try to prioritize their needs, and rightly so, over others, but at the same time struggle with the implications of what happens when they start trying to categorize specific data types, like personal data, or financial data, or healthcare data, out of the category and say, it has to stay on-site, it has to stay in country. And so these are some of the issues very broadly that I just wanted to highlight. Now it's not to say that there aren't risks, and I think to address the elephant in the room, black elephant, white elephant in the room, I don't know, there are real privacy risks. And in this day and age, I think everybody's probably very aware of some of the new risks that whether it's social media or even bad actors like cyber attackers present every time data is moved and transferred. But it's the reality of the world that we live in. So my panelists today, great panel, huge group of very, very wide variety of people, are going to talk a little bit about some of these issues, how over and above and beyond maybe government regulation, hard regulation, there could be softer regulations that we put in place to address some of these issues, and also a quick reality check for what are the genuine trade-offs when we talk about privacy and big data. So without further ado, let's move on.
Hello. Thanks so much for having me here. Really appreciate it. First off, let me start by saying that I thought I might be somewhat out of place here because I don't write software for a living. I work with a market research and a media firm based in Boston called TechEmergence. So before I go further, let me just say that very little of what I'm going to speak is from my own brilliance. A lot of what we do is we speak to business and government leaders. We've worked with a lot of big companies in the past, Facebook, Airbnb. We worked with the World Bank, the UN, Interpol. In fact, our CEO, Dan Fagella, is right now working with the US military, US military's National Academy of Defense, which is why he couldn't be here. So unfortunately, you guys get me. So I thought I'd just start off with, why is data so important? Why are companies and governments scrambling to gather all of this data about people? Well, for one, artificial intelligence and machine learning applications definitely require a lot of data, even to automate some of the more simpler tasks. But there is a caveat here to that, and that is that I think Mr. Arnab Kumar had mentioned this yesterday in his talk too, that AI is a winner-take-all situation, right? Which means that the companies with access and ownership to a lot of data are the ones that probably are going to make the best AI products, which in turn, again, means that they are the ones who are going to collect more data because more users are going to use their product. So data has this sort of cascading effect. When you look at how companies today are reacting to this, the Facebooks, the Amazons, the Googles, and even Baidu in China, you can pretty much say that these guys are already sort of data dominators in the markets that they function in. At the same time, there are other smaller companies who are kind of struggling to figure out how to keep this a fair market in this winner-take-all situation. So when I look at how, basically when we look at how so when we look at how companies here are reacting to this today, we basically conducted a research on privacy and data security for big data, where we interviewed a lot of business and government leaders. A lot of this privacy and accountability issues we might be able to take a cue from history to kind of look at what is coming in terms of regulations for privacy and big data. Most governments have antitrust laws, right, for businesses in general. These antitrust laws basically are stipulations that make sure that businesses don't have any predatory practices, or basically to make sure that it's an open and free market. When you look at what's happening in terms of regulations that might come up, it might not be too far-fetched to say that these antitrust laws might be extended to data or data management. But at the same time, these regulations are probably going to be affected by how well the big guys, the Googles, the Facebooks, manage to lobby and manage to influence policymakers. At the same time, it also depends on how the small guys manage to influence these policymakers. Both these sides have, I'd say, equal and powerful cases in terms of wanting to keep their advantages or wanting to make sure that it's a free market. I think when we look at incorporating human values and social norms into AI systems, I think I was just talking to Wendell about this too a little while ago, and he was mentioning that this is a really hard thing to do. Incorporating human values and social norms is really, really hard in the AI systems. And that's probably made harder by the fact that there's algorithmic bias, there's bias in the data that we're collecting, there's unexplainable reasons for why AI systems make certain decisions, the black box problem. But again, it's interesting to note that these terms, like human values, AI for good, free from bias, these are terms that make sense only when they have the context of being put to a particular AI application. So to this end, we conducted research and asked a lot of business and government leaders about what should we do about the ethical, legal considerations of big data and AI systems. A lot of them had actually mentioned that we should probably create some sort of ISO standards along with human rights audits for some of these AI systems. On the other end of the spectrum, there were also a lot of business leaders who actually mentioned that ISO standards might not be the best way to really go about here, because there are standards that come into play when the certification of a technology already adheres to that particular standard, and it might not be a barrier to malicious use of such data. There were also insights about trying to create punishable rules for AI systems, where AI systems try to learn about what are the constraints and what's the boundaries that they can operate in terms of privacy, in terms of security, in terms of accountability. I thought I'd just wrap this up with a question that we get asked often. This is pertaining to Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk's views on AI. Zuckerberg is definitely pro AI, and Musk feels that it's going to cause World War III. So the way we answer this question is that we have to look at the motivations of both these guys, right? Facebook is already pretty far ahead in its AI trajectory. They've collected a lot of data, about personal data about users, all of which can be used for sentiment analysis, things like that. So it behooves Zuckerberg, it's in his self-interest to say that AI is good. When you look at Musk, he's not making a lot of money out of AI at this moment, so it behooves him to say that we should slow down so that he can catch up, right? The point I'm trying to make here is that everybody has biases, and everybody has motivations, everybody has self-interest, and any kind of regulations or policies that we come up with probably need to take into account people's self-interest before we actually go ahead and get those regulations done. Thanks, that's all I have.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you all had a good lunch. Try to keep you awake this one. How many of you know about IEEE? Any of you? No. Oh, wow. Okay, that's better than usually the response I get. Yeah, but that's okay. Usually it's zero. Okay, so it takes some. Okay. So Madhu asked me when I saw him first, what is IEEE doing here? And that's a good question. I thought that's the way I will start my discussion points. And IEEE is also going through an interesting journey. The IEEE expands to the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers, for those who do not know. But having said that, in more recent past, we have philosophers, ethicists joining the community. About 3 years back, we started an initiative called a global initiative on ethics of autonomous and intelligent systems. Okay? That was our foray into what we consider the broader problem of AI. And what we did as part of that process was started writing a document called Ethically Aligned Design. The first version was an extremely crude version because a lot of times it's easier to put out a version that allows people to critique rather than wait for inputs from people and create a foolproof document. And that was not the intent at the point of time. So we created version 1 in about 2016. And what we did was we went around the world and did a consensus-based process to understand what different regions want or what they mean when they talk about ethics and AI. So we had about 700, 800 comments around the world, and we created a Ethically Aligned Design version 2 in 2017. And in 2018, I think we have already published it, or we are coming up to publishing. We are creating a final version of this document. A very comprehensive document at this stage, significantly different to what we did in 2016. So I would encourage people to take a look at that. And I think there are a few people in this room actually who contributed to that particular document. Maybe you will, you did, okay. So having said that, now what am I going to talk about? Like my background is in standards. I work for the IEEE Standards Association. We are looking at anything engineering, and AI falls very much in the space of engineering today, computer science and related fields. Of course, emerging technology is making the field extremely confusing. Too much data, we don't know what to do with the data, how to behave or act rationally with the data. So based out of this document, there were a lot of recommendations on what people would or should do. Okay? And the IEEE standards, I would like to state, is voluntary, it's market driven, it's not regulatory. So my comments are not going to be from the regulatory perspective, and it's going to be a market driven perspective. So we created a series of standards called the IEEE 7000 series of standards. It is about a series of 13 standards that are currently under development. We are hoping that some of these standards will start getting produced over the course of 2019 and 2020. These are complex problems, but we are trying to see how we can tackle few issues, few really core issues of what we mean by it. For example, in the IEEE 7000 itself, we are looking at an assessment process. It's a checklist. When designers are designing AI systems, do they have the right considerations in mind? Do they have the use cases in mind? Have they thought about potential misuse for these kind of systems that they are designing? So you go through an assessment or a checklist that somebody can come and validate, saying that, have you followed the process when you designed this system? Of course, there is something that we may not have foreseen, and that's where this is a continuously improving process, but we wanted to start there. There are a few in that series, it goes from 7000 to 7013, that tackle what we call as privacy issues. 7002 is about data privacy. But I would like to talk about one particular standard. I believe some of times my numbers might be wrong, but it's easy to search in Google. Google has all the data. Sometimes you don't realize what data they don't have, but anyway, you know. There's a standard called IEEE 7013, and it's called machine-readable privacy terms, right? We are talking about privacy and giving away your life when you are signing these privacy documents. For simple things like when I install an app, the app asks you to agree to certain terms, and that is just crazy. You know, who has the time for that? We just agree. So what we are trying to do is, and that behavior is not going to change. Humans are always going to have convenience at the foremost of their mind. You know, 5 years back, I never had a banking application on my phone. Today, I have a banking application on my phone. It is not because the banking applications have become extremely secure. I don't trust that at all, but it's a million other people are using it. I'm the one left out not using it. What the heck, let me also use it, right? The problem, it will never, we always believe that it will never happen to us. The problems will happen to somebody else. So on that trust framework, we kind of go and do it, but it's not to mean that we don't think that it has become more secure. So in that context, we feel that we should be doing certain things, hope we can make it secure, because the human behavior is going to be the path of least resistance. You know, that's not going to change significantly. So we are coming up with, can you write a privacy statement which is machine readable? Can you have your preferences as a human fed to the machine, like your phone? So if you say that these are my preferences, you look for these keywords, and the machine readable statement will say, okay, this is what the privacy statement is saying, this is what I understand your preferences are, do a matchmaking, and give you a subjective analysis of, okay, this privacy term based on your preferences is a red, green, or a yellow, and then at that point, you can make a decision saying that, okay, despite the fact it is red, I want to go ahead and use it, but at that time you take some consent, right? It is not informed consent, but you have been warned, so to speak. I don't think it solves all the problems, but it's a step in the right direction in my viewpoint. There are a few other things that are coming up. Social media, we are talking about fake news, right? Very interesting problems. So in fact, we have a standard. I think it's IEEE 7011 or 12. I may be wrong. It is on trying to figure out how to assess trustworthiness of news sources. Okay. So what are the frameworks we need to put in place? But there is another concept I would like to talk about in the world we are living in. Today, the people who are using applications, the age group has come down significantly. I saw a computer probably when I was 20. I'm dating myself here, perhaps. I'm pretty old. But having said that, my kids are using mobile phones and laptops. And in a few years now, they are 5 and 7. But even before you hit the teens, I'm sure they want to download applications. And they are going to sign agreements, right? And they are going to share data. They are already sharing data on Twitter and Facebook. And that's not going to change. That behavior is not going to change. I think trying to change that behavior is the wrong way to solve that problem. So in the context of an evolving world, what can we do? So there are a few standards in the 7000 series, which is looking at child and student data governance. How do we govern those aspects of it? So these are some very interesting problem statements we are having. Within IEEE, we are looking at it in two ways. One is the technology-specific AI. What are the standards you need to have for managing big data, for doing machine learning, some of the metadata models and the technology-specific. But there is a significant importance we are putting now on how to manage the ethical implications of the data that is being generated. We have a couple of coalitions that we have formed. One is called Oceanus. It is the Open Community on Ethics for ICT. It is a collaboration of 15 foundation members who are either standards developers or telecom bodies who are coming together and trying to understand ethics in the space of ICT. Because I think ICT is a much broader term when you are talking about sensors and software and the likes. And then we have a connectivity intelligence coalition between IEEE and the MIT Media Labs trying to solve this problem in a much more broader way. So IEEE, from where its roots are, doing DC-DC generations and phone, we are significantly into philosophy and ethics because I think there are certain governance that needs to be put in place, and we feel that given our global presence and members around the world, we can capture a broad input, but diluting that input into something that is meaningful takes a lot of effort. It's a consensus-based process, but we have to start somewhere, and I think within the next year or two, we will start some of the reality hitting the ground. Thank you very much.
You said diluting, not distilling.
Well, okay, distilling, I guess. Diluting is the wrong word. Thank you, Professor.
I don't know, that's a Freudian slip.
No. It is distilling because the problem is, if you look at the inputs, right, you have to figure out, you have to park some of them for future versions. We try to get to a consensus where we address everybody's problem and which we make everybody happy, then guess what? We will never get there. In standards, we have a statement we make. I was just telling my colleague here, how do you define when you have a good standard? When you have made everybody in the table equally unhappy.
All the principles have been diluted.
That's right. Well, that we don't know. We will see that. Okay. So if everybody is unhappy, then there is a game for everybody. Thank you. Who is next?
There's actually a very simple solution to all of this. Computers should be designed only by Catholic priests. Seriously, take a look at what they do. They get data from everything, all their parishioners, all their life decisions, and that data never leaks. Right? The objective is achieved in terms of computation. Privacy is achieved. But this actually, there is a significant intellectual laziness in people who design computers. This is actually not a societal problem. The problem starts with von Neumann and Turing and so on. Because we conflated data and compute. And right? We didn't think of them as two separate entities. Think about it. What we are talking about here is not data sharing, it's information sharing. That is the fundamental mistake we are making in this discourse. You want to know what my preferences are. You don't necessarily want to know whether I went down this route or that route because you have a decision to make. So if my preference is my data is encapsulated along with some computing entities, say I have an avatar and that avatar is allowed to be queried by other systems, then you can retain your privacy and still share information. Firefox, the latest browser, has something like that. We've been advocating this for 20-25 years. It fell on deaf ears till suddenly Mozilla decided. The nice thing would be that your preferences are kept in the browser, and if I were the kind of person who wanted to buy a Kashmir coat, my information need not go to the retailer, but the retailer can query my browser to say that, hey, the entity whom you represent, would he be interested in something like this? And that interchange can happen. So you have to rethink data in terms of information, and information is data plus compute. So the inferences of what your personal data translates to should be under your control. So if that border were to get shifted, essentially what we are talking about is a distributed computing model. The other intellectual laziness that my tribe suffers from is that we have still believed in the centralized way of computation where data and compute is kind of kept separate, right? So data is kept in a hard disk, compute is done elsewhere. Yeah, right? So that fallacy is what leads to these problems. So until computer scientists get their act right and design for privacy, right from when you're designing the CPU, your compilers, your languages, you learn the art of obfuscation, all of this discussion will be academic because you will not have the tools to realize the societal goals that you want. So having defined that, and why do computer engineers behave that way? Because it's not that computer engineers lack ethics, they can be said to lack empathy. That is a trait for any engineer because ethics, philosophy is not part of your engineering curriculum. So we tend to think in terms of just like compute problems, right? X, Y, Z is what I want, you get it. You have to take a step back and figure out what is the autonomy of the individual, right? One of the things that we have not defined is, they said data can be shared. Why? What is the value that society places on an individual? Where does it say constitutionally or from a legal perspective or from an ethical perspective, part of my autonomy is my data also? If your personhood is defiled, somebody molests you sexually, verbally, we draw very hard lines and you can't cross that. Why is it that the same outrage is not expressed when my data gets violated? Data rape is conceptually a fact. You have to recognize that my autonomy exists along with my expressiveness. My words, my thoughts are all inherently part of my being. Violation of that is violation of my selfhood. Now, if you start looking at an individual from that perspective and you start redesigning your computing systems that way, then you will learn to put privacy boundaries in the computing itself and you will design computers where data cannot leak. See, it is next to impossible in a modern computing system. I design processors for a living, by the way. Half of my job is philosophy and ethics of AI. My day job is actually designing processors. So I understand how they work. So I'm at the heart of what every computing system is all about. There is no way to hide data inside a computer. It is by choice. It is not by design. If you want data privacy has to be at the heart of computer architecture. It should not leak without your concurrence. What should flow is information, correct? The second thing is, when we talk about all of this, privacy laws have to be different for different kinds of data. Medical data, consent of your data in an emergency situation, in a trauma, cannot be asked for, right? I mean, you got a brain injury and stuff, everything about you needs to be known to the trauma surgeon. But at the same time, if you're going for elective surgery or going to some doctor, then you should be able to control it. So you need that fine granularity of data. The same standards need not be applied to consumer data. The world is not a retailer does not know that I like a particular brand of chocolates compared to the other one. Enabling commerce cannot be equated to social good. You have to stop that equality. There are different values of data, right? So if you talk about data being the new oil, information is power, right? That is the area where you should be focusing at. That is, why should an entity need that information? Should it be based on consent? So depending on societal needs, the value we place on each piece of information, each data should be different. Only then we can come to a set of norms which allow exchange of information and exchange of data. Without this discussion happening, the rest of the discussion will get pedantic. I'll take GDPR, I'll take GDPR -1, I'll do GDPR +2, I will change clause 3.2 to 3.4. That is a very mechanical way of doing this. There is no philosophical basis for this discussion. I mean, this is just building in semantics, right? The heart of the problem is not being addressed anywhere. And you're just punting the problem down the line for the next generation to take over. The other problem is, inference itself is data. You're talking about data privacy. How about inference privacy? What is an AI allowed to infer about me? Prejudice is at the heart of human existence. By nature, we are a prejudiced species. And what do we do? Our children, AI entities, will be created in our own reflection. So, everything that is in the dark part of the human soul will necessarily infect an AI entity because we know better. The entities we create will inherit our values and our lack of values, right? So, there is a degree of, this is a great chance for humanity. You first have to acknowledge that we as a species are probably at an evolutionary dead end. That we are not the pinnacle of evolution as most of us think. We probably are an experiment gone bad that can be joined only 1,000 to 2,000 years from now. So this is a chance for us to create a new species like AI species and stuff which don't make the mistakes we make. Why is it that we see AI only as a tool to further our own desires? Why can't the AI seen as an entity that can recreate a better society? And with that,
thank you. So our last panelist.
So this is always the hardest panel because everybody's just eaten and we're all really ready for a nap. We shouldn't be talking about these things, but I thought I would at least drop a few bombs in the room and see if that would keep people awake. Because I have become deeply concerned about whether our conversations are just highly unrealistic. And that we really aren't talking seriously about the trade-offs that are entailed here. On one hand, we live on a planet with more than 8 billion people and growing. We are using resources at a faster rate than they exist on the planet. We are confronted with global climate change, which is in itself going to create serious disruption, and we aren't dealing with that effectively. So those are givens. In that context of givens, when you start talking about health and food security and biosecurity and education, we are desperately in need of any technology that helps us address the fundamental problems that are occurring in our society. And here we are in India, one small country, or at least medium-sized country, that has over 1 billion members of the world population. So you are in desperate need of any solution you can get from AI. There are efficiencies that can be acquired. But the difficulty is we are talking as if those benefits can all be realized without trade-offs. And we use these languages about digital marketplaces and how we're going to solve the privacy challenge and we're going to have real informed consent as if these things are actually going to happen while we are putting these mechanisms in place that we're trying to address fundamental challenges with. And we are not realistically talking about the actual trade-offs that are going to occur. So for the efficiencies that AI will bring in the management of various services, what are the costs? Well, one of the costs is an energy cost. People talk about blockchain technology without acknowledging that the cost of blockchain technology and energy usage could easily outweigh the amount of energy we could create on this planet. But blockchain technology is going to solve all the distribution problems. It's going to solve all the questions of trust. No, it's not going to happen. That kind of blockchain cannot be implemented, so compromises are going to be made. And one of the trade-offs is the adoption of AI is going to exacerbate privacy concerns. It's going to exacerbate security. And when we bring up the ethical concerns around these issues, it's not like the ethics is going to stave off the weakening of those values. At the best, the ethics, the standards we're putting in place, at the best, they're going to help us ameliorate some of the most egregious offenses. And when they have enforcement behind them, they may give us tools. But when I say give us tools, give those of us with enough privileges to be able to support, to hire the lawyers, whatever else we have to do, or enlist our ACLUs or whatever other bodies we have to fight for our rights. But that's not going to happen for all the citizenry. And let us not pretend it is going to happen for all the citizens. So that's my number one point. My number one point is ethics, standards, they are not weak, but they are not powerful enough tools that they are going to ameliorate all the trade-offs we are going to engage in. And yet ethics and standards become the most effective tools we do have in our toolkit, particularly since we can no longer rely on governments which just don't have the capacity to even understand what these technologies are, let alone keep pace with the rapid rise of new challenges and new considerations. We may need to find ways of giving standards a little bit more teeth, some way of creating enforcement when they are getting violated. Some form of regulation. Now, whether that takes the form of governments transforming standards into regulation, or whether that takes the form of governments recognizing that what the significant standard bodies like IEEE are putting in place should be treated as, any violation of those should be treated as violations of the public trust, and therefore they are enforceable for egregious violations regardless of whether we have laws, which is one of my recommendations for actually what we need in this space. That could be a road we could go down. But again, let us not fool ourselves. Let us not pretend that if we create digital markets, we're going to be able to ensure that everybody has informed consent, that everybody's privacy is protected. I've been fascinated by India's fascination with digital markets. Because I'm not sure whether they can be pulled off. Nobody has demonstrated to me that this is a workable way of moving forward. And one of the problems is the type of consents you have from the users and your ability to enforce them. Is every time my data gets used, do I have to give consent? And do I have even the capacity to understand these usages? Do I understand that if my genome has been given to one body to help find a cure for cancer, that that's not also being used by another body that's really engaged in a much more commercial enterprise that may or may not serve the public good. Are the digital marketplaces that we put in place in order to conglomerate data in ways that can serve the public good, are they only going to be used for that purpose? Or are they going to be used for commercial entities that are perhaps as interested in manipulating my behavior as they are in anything that will actually serve the broader good, will serve AI for all, will serve the good of all of humanity? When we move into a universe where more and more data is being collected, where there are sensors everywhere, and there's software that engages in facial recognition, it engages in analysis of your facial expression, your voice intonation, and it knows when you are vulnerable. And it knows that in real time, and it uses that to manipulate your behavior to get you to buy a good and service, a good or service. Is there any form of regulation we can put in place that's going to slow that down? Is there any degree of self-understanding that you can have that you can ensure that you are not being manipulated in egregious ways? Excuse me. It's probably my cue that I should wrap it up here. But my real point is, we are sitting here with fantasies about how we're going to get everything. It's not going to happen. There are trade-offs, and we are not having the public conversations about what those trade-offs are and whether we are willing to make those trade-offs for the benefits that will be derived from those trade-offs. And that's the great failure that's happening here. We have governments who don't understand what the problems are, so they're promising everything to everyone they can't deliver. They don't even understand what trade-offs are being made. And they may be even afraid to have those discussions with the public. So this is my call for more realism, for more imbuing the conversation with a degree of sophistication about what ethics means, so that ethics aren't just the good guys playing for their protection of privacy without having the balance of the societal needs for security, for health, for education, for just the mere survival of humanity. And for realism in conversations such as, should we be developing new species? Should we be enhancing humans? Should we be creating entities that supposedly will solve the flaws, the evolutionary flaws that exist in human character? And if we do that in the process, what's going to happen to the 8 billion of us who bear those flaws?
He doesn't care. He doesn't care about it.
Most of my transhumanist friends say they care about it and say that if these technologies come along, they should be made available to everybody. But they know that's not what's going to happen. They know these technologies are just going to exacerbate inequalities. Now, if we exacerbate those inequalities, and while we're exacerbating those inequalities, we also do solve the problem of world hunger, then perhaps we, society as a whole, might accept that. But we should at least be asked to give our tacit approval to it. It shouldn't just be foisted upon us by the technological elite. I'm a member of the technological elite. I'm not a naysayer about any of these. I'm also considering when I will take a pill that will enhance my well-being and when I won't. I'm not an ethicist who thinks that just fighting for good values solves our overall problem. But the problems are deep, the the sophistication required to think about these challenges is unfortunately often lacking. And the will to have the public conversation to at least trust that if we talk honestly and realistically about these challenges, that valid ways of moving forward will emerge. That does not seem to be in our societies right now. And that's a tragedy.
That's a very sad note.
Thank you. Thank you for all the panelists.